Welcome to the Panza Panza Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word panza is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Panza Panza Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Panza Panza Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Welcome to Panza Panza. I'm your host, Kemi Seriki, and today we are honored to have Ms. Doreen Yomoah, the founder of Child Free African, joining us today to educate our community about our viewpoint on being child-free and the purpose of the organization. Ms. Yomoah was born in Ghana, Accra, and she was raised in Japan and United States. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate you coming in because this is a conversation where we have uncomfortable dialogue within our community. So as more uncomfortable it is better for our community because we have to bring many things that people don't really feel comfortable talking about and bring it open to the surface. So can you fully introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born, where you spent most of your childhood and your adult life.
Firstly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I was born in Accra, Ghana, to two Ghanaian parents. Actually, they're from two different ethnic groups. My mom is Ga, my dad is Dagati. And it's not that common for Dagati people to marry outside the ethnic group, but my dad did. When I was one, I moved to Tokyo, and my mom, my dad, and I lived there until I was 12. And my sister was also born while we were in Japan. When I was 12, my mom, my sister, and I moved to the US. So I was there for the last part of junior high school, and I also went to university there. When I was 23, I moved to China, Shanghai, and I taught English there for a couple of years. I went back to Ghana when I was 25, and then when I was 28, I moved to the UK to do my master's. When I was 29, I moved to Senegal, and when I was 30, I moved to Switzerland, where I am now.
You should be an ambassador. To represent Ghana in all these different countries, you should become an ambassador because, so you speak multi-languages then.
I speak English, Japanese, and French.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you don't speak Mandarin.
When I was in China, I did pick up quite a bit of Mandarin, but I've forgotten almost everything since it's been so long since I left.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting anyway. So this platform is where we only talk about uncomfortable conversation, like I said before. We also talk about our immigrant experience in the diaspora. So what would you say are some of the challenges or struggle or being first generation African immigrant child growing up in Japan and in United States and many of these places that you've been to?
Well, I would say growing up in Japan, maybe the most difficult thing was just that there were not very many Black people around. So I was always a novelty, and it's not really that nice when you're a child to have people pointing and yelling at you. And another thing is just that I didn't get to know my family, my extended family, because they were mostly in Ghana. I met a couple of family members, like when we visited the US, I have like a couple of uncles there. And we did visit Ghana once when I was 7. But besides that, I didn't really know or have any kind of relationship with my extended family, which I think is one of the things that is a little bit unfortunate about being a migrant or an expat child. And then when I moved to the US, another thing that was really challenging was the fact that everyone assumed that I was a Black American. I already had an American accent because I went to American school when I was in Japan, but I didn't know anything about American culture at all, for the most part. I especially didn't know anything about Black American culture. So just having people's expectations and not living up to those expectations at all. And I think this is quite unfair for anyone because we're all individuals and we shouldn't have to fit a stereotype of what you think a community is. But for someone who isn't even a part of that community, and I don't say that because I want to distance myself from African Americans. I mean, I feel a sense of kinship with them as well, but it's just a very different background that we have. So those are the main things that I found to be quite challenging growing up as an expat child.
And what you say, it is so important because I have two children here too. My son just turned 26 today. And my daughter, she's 22. And raising them, whereby they went to school, predominantly Black environment sometimes, whereby many of their fellow students, they talk about their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and all this extended family. And many of the immigrant children actually raised in isolation, even though they might have both the father and the mother there, but there's no extended family. And I'm so happy that you brought this up, because this forum is also to educate many of our community to understand what is the struggle of first generations who were born here or brought here at a very young age. Because back in Ghana, or me as from Nigeria, if my children will have been growing up in Nigeria, there's a sense of that community. The neighbors, even if you are within the Accra, within the big city, there will still be people who are there that you could actually connect and relate to. And that's one of the struggle that many children of immigrants are actually going through. And also regarding what you just said about being seen as Black America, there's a difference between immigrant experience and Black experience. And on many occasions, that's like code switching. You don't even know where to fit. Are you Black? Or are you an immigrant? When you're among the Black people, you have to feel the environment first to be able to see whether you actually fit in or not, whether they're going to welcome your African heritage. Because I've seen that happen with many of our youth who were born here. So how were you able to cope with all those challenges when you were here?
When I was in the US or Japan?
Yes, in Japan as well, being the only child of color as well as in US.
Well, I'll start with Japan. My parents did have a few Ghanaian friends, and one of them had some children around my age, so that was really nice to have. And in addition to that, my parents are very, very good friends. Even they've been friends for about 40 years now with some Japanese people that they met in Ghana, and they're still very great friends. And we also, for example, had a neighbor who was an white American woman married to a Japanese man, and she was sort of like my grandmother while in Japan. So that's something that I think I didn't really realize when I was growing up what I was missing, because we had these other people who sort of filled in the role of family.
Yes.
And then moving to the US, basically when I got there and I was so out of touch with everything, I spent about a year trying to catch up on American pop culture. And I mean, I was actually studying it, like studying slang terms that I could use that other kids were using, what music was cool to listen to and stuff like that. But I never fully felt like I belonged there. Like I was kind of an invisible immigrant because I didn't have an accent that stood out. But inside I just always felt like this isn't really where I belong or where I'm meant to be living.
And that's very, very important. Like I said, even with a lot of our children who were born here, I mean, they grew up in this society, they still feel left out on many occasions. And many African Americans may not understand what are the struggle of many immigrant children in this country who are also Black. Because during the Black Lives Matters or many of the rally that they have outside within the community, within New York or any other state about injustice that is going on, there are many situations that a lot of our people will actually participate. But you will have the conversation with many African Americans who believe, Africans don't really come out and participate. And my question is, how do you know African didn't come out? Do I have to wear my African attire? Or put the label on my forehead and say, here comes an African who is showing up in this parade? And they feel like we don't participate or we are not interested in the movement. The movement also affects us. No matter what, no matter where we are. And as an immigrant, I have to battle too. For me, I have an accent, okay? So when I speak, I could face biases and discrimination from other people of color as well. Compared to children who you grew up, you didn't even have the accent, but you still have to continue to navigate through that environment to see what actually feels comfortable for you, what is not. And that is very challenging and very challenging to many of our children who were born here or brought here at a very young age. So growing up, do you have conversation about your Blackness or your African identity with your parents?
Well, my parents had the conversation that I think all Black parents in a white environment have, which is you have to be twice as good to get half as far.
Yes.
But my parents themselves, I think, they did not know that much about race in America. So it was a very difficult conversation for them to have, especially for my father, he didn't move to America. He stayed in Japan the whole time and he would come visit us on his breaks. So he never really had the experience of living there and like knowing what it's like to be a Black man whose life is in America. So I think they did the best they could in terms of teaching us about race in America. But I also think that it was before the internet was what it is now. So I think it was very difficult for them to really understand what me and my sister went through.
Yeah, and it's very, very difficult. Like I said, we have immigrant parents because we never grew up in a racialized society.
Yeah.
In Ghana, they might say you are Ga, you are, different ethnic group that they relate you to. And nobody will ever say, oh, you don't belong. But when you are living in a racialized society, it's completely different. So as an African parent, we might say, oh, make sure you focus on your education. When you have your education, everything will be fine. But not understanding that there's so many other challenges that comes with the color of your skin as a result of that. So how would you summarize your identity as it relates to your dual identity, African identity, and your Black experience?
Well, what I call myself is a Ghanaian third culture kid.
Wow, I've never heard. State that again. So whoever is listening to this, they will and tell me the meaning of it.
Okay, Ghanaian third culture kid. So the term third culture kid was come up by David Pollock and Ruth Van Renken, who basically wrote a book about children who grow up abroad and at some point have to repatriate or go back to their home country. So it's like, we don't fully fit into our parents' culture. We don't fully fit into the culture of the country that we're living in. So we create a third culture among ourselves. So it's easier for me in some ways to relate to, I had a Chinese and French girl who grew up in Thailand, and we could share experiences of what it was like to go into international school and have our parents not really be a part of the local culture. And we were a little bit part of the local culture, but at the same time not, because we obviously didn't fit the physical part. So that's how I identify these days. My friend was Chinese and French, and she grew up in Thailand. I'm Ghanaian, growing up in Japan and the US. And in some ways, we can relate to one another more than she could relate to a French girl or a Chinese girl, or than I can relate to a Ghanaian girl who grew up in their own environment.
Okay, that's really great. I'm glad you're able to navigate through yourself and create your own definition. Maybe other first generation or second generation listening to you, they might look into those kind of identity and say, you know what, I'm going to coin on that as well. I'm going to use it. How did you navigate through social life in college? Did you struggle fitting into the predominant culture on campus, especially coming from an African immigrant home?
Actually, when I got to college, that's when I basically threw everything I could into fitting in. First time that I felt like, okay, we're all here at this university. It doesn't matter what country you're from. We're all people at this university. And that's the thing that we all have in common. I felt like, okay, it doesn't matter that I grew up here or that my passport is this. I'm just part of this university. So that was the first time I felt kind of like, okay, I belong. I'm not weird. People don't need to understand this or that about me. It's just, I'm part of this university community.
So did you engage in any social organization that also have other race? Let's assume in United States, you might have children who belong to African Student Association, Caribbean Student Association, Black Student Association, and also, some association that is predominantly white student as well. Do you participate in all those different culture within the college campus?
Personally, the outside extracurriculars that I did were more focused on my academics than they were on because we did have a Black student caucus, we had an African Students Association, and I did go to a couple of meetings. But for me, I just felt more in place with people in the organizations that were more focused on what I was studying. Okay. But that's not to say I didn't have friends. I had, very diverse friends, Black friends who were born in America, immigrant Black friends and Latino friends.
Which is very good. So thank you so much for that. Because diversity is the core of the nature, of the world. Because even the connection, being able to connect with other people while you are in college is the way to create friendship and be able to sometimes connect later on in life. Come to the career contact or somebody who is going to be of beneficial to your career growth. in the field.
Yeah.
So because one thing I see common among many of our youth is that when they're in college, being that they come from an immigrant background, sometimes they don't really, and they don't think they fit in. It might be very difficult for them to really integrate within the other social group as well.
But looking back, though, almost 20 years later, I do regret not joining the Black Student Union or the African Caucus. But at the time, it just didn't seem like what I needed to do.
Oh, okay. So knowing that many parents do not like to dive into uncomfortable conversation, I'm talking about African immigrant parents with their children. Can you think back to your childhood? What conversation would you have preferred for your parents to have with you growing up, even though the conversation may expose their vulnerability as well?
I think it would have been really nice to know a lot more about their upbringing, and not just my dad would always tell stories about how he had to walk to school 20 miles uphill both ways without shoes. But I just mean more stories about like being with his brothers and his sisters and his mom and dad. And same with my mom. I think I would have liked to know a lot more about that. And also, I just think that certain conversations that you have as part of growing up were not really conversations that we had in my house. And I think that would have been conversations that would have been beneficial to me. But as far as I know, it's kind of rare for Ghanaian parents to have those kinds of conversations with their children.
Yeah, because culturally it's so common among African parents, whereby our conversation is directions and advice.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's more of a direction and advice. It's something that I had to learn myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing that I see, when I came to this country, I didn't have my children until 10 years later, over 10 years later. I know many of our people, when they come from a different part of Africa, is either they bring the children along or they immediately start having families. So that didn't happen with me and many of the people that I know. So that allows me to be able to integrate into the society individually as myself.
Yeah.
And then not only that, taking that time off allowed me to understand what are the struggle of what it is to be a parent in this kind of society, to understand that there's certain things I have to change when I have to start having my children. Because even after having the children myself, the old way still creep itself back, whereby, I still go back to the way African, the way I was raised, but I had to learn because my children actually brought it to me and said, no, we have to have conversation and you have to learn to listen to me. So now I've learned to listen. And I've learned to say, do you need advice or I shouldn't say anything? What is it? As a parent. So in terms of, should I just listen and keep quiet and just leave it like that?
Yeah, now that I'm an adult, our relationship is very different. And it's not always obey me and do this. It's, real conversations between us.
Between you. So now let's focus on conversation on child-free Africa. So what prompts your decision to be child-free?
I don't know that there was one thing that prompted my decision. I always thought that I would have children, but it was something I was never looking forward to. And then around 2003 or 2004, the internet was first starting to really be a place where people had these types of discussions, and not only on having children, but just personal decisions in general. And I came across a number of women who had decided that they weren't going to have children. And that's when I thought, oh, okay, that's a choice. I don't have to. So basically when I was 22, that was when I realized I don't have to have children. So that means I'm not going to.
Wow. So what would you say your parents, when you told them that, what was their response?
Well, I don't know if my father knows, but my mother said that it's my life and it's my choice, which is not what I was expecting, but I was very pleasantly surprised.
Okay. So she respects your choice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So on your website, I see that you have a blog post and blog rule. Can you further explain to people who may listen to this podcast, what kind of discussion that you have on your blog post? What does it focus on? Regarding also the blog rule, what is the conversation on blog rule?
The blog role is basically just other blogs that I've found who have views that I find very interesting or that I agree with, and that I just want to encourage other people to check out those bloggers as well. And some of them I know personally, some of them I don't. It's just I chose anyone that I thought, I like this blog, I like what they're saying, other people should read it too.
Oh.
And as far as the blog itself, I basically started it because I was looking for blogs from other child-free African women, and I couldn't find anything. The only thing I could find was African American women. and, people of all races. But when I typed in African child-free, all that came up was African American child-free. And I looked for a long time, and then I thought, wait, okay, if this doesn't exist, that means that I need to make it. And so basically, I just talk about any aspect of my life being child-free. I also have guest blogs from other child-free African people, men and women. And it's really become a place where not only African people talk about it, even, people from different backgrounds also will comment sometimes and say, thank you for sharing your perspective. And I just basically want people to know that regardless of what societal expectations there are, you only have one life. You cannot make your life miserable to fit societal expectations. And for some people, maybe they would be miserable if they didn't have children. So then, yes, I think they should have children. For me personally, and for some other people, we don't want to have children. We want to spend our lives in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your argument of being child-free because not everybody or everyone have the capacity of being a parent. There's a great differences between giving birth to a child and parenting a child.
Yeah.
And some people don't have what it takes to be a parent, what a child may demand emotionally and financially. So there's some people, both men and women, they have children, but not emotionally connected with that child that they gave birth to. So I understand that. And it doesn't make any sense to have a child that you don't feel connected or is not what you want, and which is not one of those choices that is common in Africa. Mm-hmm. There have been so many stories of women actually being blamed. Even if a man has the problem of infertility, women usually get the blame of why don't you have children or anything that has to do with reproductive health. So I really respect that aspect of what you are doing. So what are the differences between child-free and childless? Because I know many men and women who are childless do not have the choice for biological reason or infertility. And that comes with a lot of frustration and emotional distress of trying several times and being unable to have a child. Can you speak on that issue?
Yes. So being childless is basically understood to be somebody who have, whether it's because of fertility issues or maybe they didn't find the right partner before they couldn't have children anymore. And I think that comes with a lot of pain a lot of the time that I can't imagine, and I only can feel empathy for. Whereas being child-free is making a choice, regardless of your fertility, I guess, is one way I could say it, that you don't want to have children for whatever reason. For some people, they think maybe they know that they wouldn't be good parents. For some people, it's just not a priority. Some people just don't like children for whatever reason, but it's a choice that has been made versus a circumstance that befell them.
So have you experienced a lot of pushback within African community, Ghanaian community, or many of the people of African descent that you come across?
Absolutely. When I was in Ghana, no one respected or accepted that I was child-free. Everyone said, no, you need to have children. In fact, you should have them now. And I actually was in a relationship when I was in Ghana with somebody, and this person had initially said that he accepted it, but then later it turned out that he hadn't accepted it, and he just thought that I was going to change my mind about it. And that was also a big issue. Basically, the only acceptance that I've received from my people who are related to me is from my mother and my sister. But for the most part, the argument is you just need to have children.
Oh, wow. So it's very demanding. A lot of times I tell people that's not what I want. They want to decide for you what they feel, what they know is right for you. Without understanding. And that's something that we have to work on within our society anyway. What have you seen so far as being benefit of not having children?
I think that for me, the benefit is freedom. I personally really like kids. So if I want to hang out with a kid, I go to my friend's house, hang out with their kid, and then I can go home. I just really like having the freedom to say, okay, this weekend I'm going to go to Lyon just because I want to. Or tonight I'm just going to go to bed without cooking dinner because I'm too tired. Or whatever it is. If I had a child, I would have to be constantly concerned about doing what's best for them, which is, of course, it's normal. But it's just a type of pressure that I'm not ready to deal with. And I just really like having the freedom of knowing if something goes bad, it's just me that's affected. There's not a person who's depending on me that I also have to worry about. And yeah, I basically can kind of make my life the way I want it to be.
That's true. So what do you think the society or culture or religion projected on you as disadvantages of not having children?
I think the biggest one is there's not going to be anyone to take care of you when you get older. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's not a good reason for me personally to have children, just because I know it's quite common in African societies that you take care of your parents when you get older. But I think it's just a bit of an unfair or maybe unrealistic expectation, depending on your circumstances, that you bring another person into the world because of something that you expect from them later. I mean, heaven forbid your child could die. Maybe you don't have a good relationship with your child. Maybe the child moves abroad. There could be any number of reasons why your child is unable to do that for you when you get older. And if you've counted on that and you've had a child for that, I think that's not good for either of you.
Mm-hmm. You're so right about what you're saying, because I had that argument before. Especially, there are two things to this. Back home, in different parts of Africa, children are like your social security. Mm-hmm. There's no social security that says, okay, when you get older, this is the money being set aside for you to be able to take care of yourself. That's why the society focus more on saying, okay, when you have children, at least they could take care of you when you get older. Mm-hmm. The argument also came in terms of many of our children who were born here or brought here at a very young age, and they're getting older. They have a job. They're making a living. Mm-hmm. And there's sometimes some parents put a tax on their children that you still need to do your daily financial support for me. Mm-hmm. The parents don't really have those kind of resources, I understand. But if you have those kind of resources that you are able to live on your own before, even if the children are not in your life, why are you taxing them that they have to give you certain amount of money? And moreover, in Western world, especially us who raise our children in this country, we all work and we have social security payment, that is being set aside. So when you get older, those are the things that will take charge. Yeah. There's also arguments in terms of, many of these African children. I think years ago, I did an interview with someone who was telling me how African children who are here, many of them may end up putting their parents in a nursing home. Mm-hmm. And my argument to him was that, you know what? American putting their parents in nursing home does not mean because they don't care for them. I said, because this society demand is a different setup. Yeah. Those children may also have their own family and their life as well. And I've yet to come across somebody who just dumped their parents in a nursing home for no reason. Mm-hmm. Because most of the time they have other care services that could provide those kind of care for the parents. If the parents are able to do certain things, I said, imagine if the parents who have Alzheimer's, there's no way of somebody taking care of that parent. Yeah. Because you are not an expert to be able to deal with those kind of sickness. So exactly, it depends on different. So I'm just trying to bring out so many aspects of looking at this from different perspective and from different point of view. So in Africa, is most of the time is to say that, well, we have children so that they could take care of us when we get older. But there's so many women in Africa too, or men who couldn't have children. So who takes care of them? Yeah. So that's part of my defense of your philosophy about these things, So who takes care of them? Because there's a saying in my language, Yoruba, meaning that whether you have a child or you don't have a child, somebody is still going to bury you. Mm-hmm. Somebody will be available to bury you, whether you're able to conceive a child or you didn't have any children. There will be somebody that will bury you no matter what. It's part of the challenges, and your generation will be the one to bring those challenges in. That, no matter what, we have to engage in those kind of conversations. So how often do you come across African male or female who have said that they don't want to have children? Well, I can't say that it happens very often, but I have had a number of people reach out to me through my blog. Mm-hmm. A few times a month, basically, who tell me that, they're also African and they also don't want to have children. In real life, because I'm not in Africa right now, obviously it's not something that happens all that much. But yeah, I would say every month I have a couple of people reach out and tell me that they don't want children. And it's good to know, not because I don't want people to have children, but just to know that people are starting to feel comfortable with making a choice that's the right choice for them. Okay. And they found your blog. an idea that they could relate to.
Yeah.
In terms of the comfortability of it. What do you actually say to them? Do they ever seek your advice on how to be able to cope with their family member who might be pressuring them, who might be putting tax on them and say, you must get married soon, we're expecting a grandchild. If you don't have children, then we're going to disown you. If I didn't give birth to you, you won't be here in the first place. So you've been selfish saying that you're not going to have children. Have you come across those kind of conversations?
I have, not through my blog, but more in other places online. And I don't know if I would say this is advice, but what worked in my case, not for my parents, because like I mentioned earlier, my mom is fine with it, but it was leaving Ghana. That was what was able to get me away from the pressure, because I did feel a lot of pressure when I was there. And I don't know, maybe I would have given in by now if I were still there. But being able to leave and carve out an independent life on my own is what was able to allow me to actually live my truth.
Wow.
But I know that that's not possible for everybody. And I know that a lot of people don't want to leave their home anyway. So it's very difficult for me to give advice on that, because some people don't want to do what I did, or maybe they don't have the resources to leave. I can only tell them what worked for me. And I really encourage them to stay true to what their own personal desires are for their own lives.
I didn't even get to say how I met you, how I knew about this child-free Africa. It was from BBC, the interview you conducted with another lady who also came.
Yeah, Nina Steele.
Okay, as a guest. She's from which part of Africa?
She's originally from Côte d'Ivoire.
Côte d'Ivoire. Then I was listening. It was something that I've never heard of before. And I said, I have to listen to this. I have to invite both, if I could get both of them to come in so that I could actually have the interview done and explore more on this kind of conversation. So how did you meet her?
Well, the thing, either she reached out to me or I reached out to her several years ago, and we both wrote something for each other's blogs. And then the BBC reached out to both of us separately and asked us if we would both appear on their channel. So it was nice to talk to her again. But we have very different stories.
Yeah, you have because it wasn't that she didn't want to have a child. She was just childless, So that was her story. And she took it upon herself and said, you know what, I'm just going to continue with my life. And according to what she said, it wasn't because of her fault. It was because her husband was the one with the difficulties being able to produce a child. And I really highly respect that. And many women who society actually put pressure on and requested that they must have a child, because if they don't have a child, they are less of a person within the community or the society. Seeing this kind of story, listening to this kind of story would be something that will empower them. Have you ever tried to have like a seminar or have an open forum discussion on this?
No, I haven't, but that's a very interesting idea. I think it would be a way to really hear all different kinds of perspectives. So thank you. I'll take that idea.
Oh my God, now, if people hear this, they say, are you putting ideas in our head? Continue to push more people to be child-free. At least you have your own children. Why are you pushing this idea more? I'm going to hear more of this, So apart from becoming child-free, what other traditional or cultural values or religious beliefs that you detach yourself from?
Well, I used to be very religious, and I'm not at all anymore. And that's also something that, I never expected that to happen when I was younger and I was religious. But as I grew up, I just began to realize that I don't really resonate. Well, when I was younger, I used to be very religious. I grew up as a Protestant Christian. And when I got older, I began to realize that the values of Christianity don't really resonate with me. So that's one thing that's very traditional in the society that I come from that I'm not really aligned with anymore. In addition, Ghana is a very patriarchal society, and I've been a feminist for as long as I can remember. And even my parents, they're not very traditional, but they're a lot more traditional than, say, my friends' parents who were born in America. But for whatever reason, their relationship did not have that dynamic. So I think that maybe in a subconscious way influenced me. But I'm very against the idea of a man needing to be the head of the household because he's the man. And, men needing to be leaders. I think that leadership is based on a lot more than just what your gender is. It's based on what you bring to the table, how you can lead people in a way that is effective and still kind, I think. So those are two ways in which I'm quite non-traditional for a Ghanaian person.
So even though you are child-free, would you also state that you may eventually want to get married one day?
I think it's possible. I don't know how likely it is, but yeah, let's say I might get married someday, but I'm not necessarily looking for it.
Okay, you're not really looking for it because I'm just bringing up many of the points people might say, oh, does she really want to get married? Or if she get married, the husband might say, oh, well, you need to have a child, because if you don't have a child, what's the point of us getting together in the first place? It's part of the tradition and African culture.
Yeah.
So you brought up the word feminist. When did you realize that you're a feminist?
I actually can't remember when I learned of the word feminism, but as far back as I can remember, I have always been very much like girls can do anything that boys can do. There is nothing that you should tell a girl that she can't do just because she's a girl. And when I was very young, that's what I believed. And as I grew up, those beliefs never changed. They've evolved, of course. And now they include all sorts of things that I didn't know about when I was younger. Like, when it comes to different queer identities, when it comes to issues like the pay gap, when it comes to who takes care of the children, who takes care of the household. So my views have evolved a lot, but the idea of men and women being equal and the idea that we shouldn't assign people roles based on whether they're a man or they're a woman has always been something that I believed.
When we're talking about feminists, there's a different definition when it comes to feminism, because there's an African concept of feminist, and then there's also European concept of being feminist. As a woman of color, you're not just worried about your gender, you also worry about your race.
Yeah.
As well.
Very much. Yeah.
Very much so. How do you see the definition of feminism from the European perspective compared to the African perspective?
Actually, something that I've observed through my reading that I think is quite interesting is that I think that African feminism and European feminism has some parallels, and American feminism as well, that we don't really discuss in feminist discourse. For example, when it comes to Black Americans, they often talk about how a white American feminism has excluded us and it has had different battles than what we have had. Because for us, working outside the home wasn't something we had to fight for. It's something we had to do. And in that way, I think that when it comes especially to like middle class African feminism, I think there are more similarities between the African feminists of, say, the 60s and 70s and the white American and European feminists of the 60s and 70s than there are between Black feminists. I think that the goals are or should be quite aligned, which is just equity for everybody and equality for everyone, regardless of their sex or gender. But the thing that I think is missing is that a lot of white feminists don't understand that people of color go through very different things, and people of color includes women of color. And if you're going to be talking about feminism and equality for women, then you have to include that. You can't just say equality for white women with white men. It should be equality for all women with all women and with all men. And we also need to take into account the fact that men of our race also suffer from different kinds of discrimination, maybe not gender discrimination, but if we want to talk about equality for all people, regardless of gender, we have to take into account people's race and gender at the same time.
I remember years ago when I went to Women March in Manhattan here, and the march, it was mainly white women who were there. Many white people were there. There are a few Blacks, people of color who were also present at the march. But I did the march, and coming home, I remember a white woman who approached me, and we struck into conversation, and she asked me, why is it that we don't have too many Black women? Because I have to be the one to speak for all the Black people.
Yeah.
Why they didn't show up at the march. So I said, challenges are different. Even though we're all women, we're all female. I said, but our challenges are different. I said, for me, as a Black woman and as a mother of a Black boy, I worry about the safety of my child every day. I said, how many times do they have rally? They're talking about Black Lives Matters, mothers coming out to talk about the challenges that they face with the injustice, the inequality of the society that many white women also come out and support. I said, so we have to look at those dynamics of things. Even in the 60s, in the 50s, when they were marching, Black women were talking about issue of race, lynching their men. White women were talking about nuisances of how men were behaving. Because my concern Black women's concern was not their own concerns.
Yeah.
And the same thing we have to look at. Each culture is different when it comes to the issue of feminism and what they want to pursue in their society. Feminism does not mean, I'm walking around freedom in terms of the way I could dress the way I want. Or a woman who is wearing an hijab is not a feminist. So the woman who is wearing a hijab may view it as if it's my right to be able to cover myself.
Yeah.
It's my right to actually make choices of what I want for myself. Actually, for me to cover up is actually a way to protect myself from all these other things. So you cannot impose what you feel that a feminist should be on another person. So that's how I see it when it comes to between Black and white or any other culture or tradition, when it comes to the idea of fighting for women's rights. So that's how I see it. But thank you so much for all this knowledge. Have you ever come across people who will challenge you and say the idea of child-free is by your own choice, that they might think that you imposing those kind of value on them?
I think that a lot of people who have children sort of view it as an attack if we say we're child-free. And I don't know if that's because of their insecurities or what, because we're simply saying we are child-free and we would like that choice to be respected in the same way that we respect that you have children. And for me personally, I think that parents should have paid parental leave. I think that there should be a lot more, especially in the West, well, I guess everywhere, a lot more safety nets for people with children. There should be a lot more care provided and care that is well compensated for children. So it's not an issue of us saying, we don't want you to have children. It's just, we don't want to, and please just respect that.
Yeah, I understand because, whether we like it or not, all over the world, even the other day, I was reading Time magazine of how much intense it is for some women who couldn't have children, but they want to pay somebody to be a surrogate, for them, or they want to adopt a child because it's so much of what they want. They just want to be a parent and they don't mind paying as much as possible to become a parent. So it's part of still human nature, reproduction. Many living things all over the world reproduce.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about plants, animals, and all this other stuff, because I was looking at your Instagram post and I saw something that says, spare your potential children from diseases, mystery, headache, rape, depression, cancer, addiction, and all this other stuff. Reproduction is common, selfish, and primitive act of acts that create immense suffering and adversity. So I said, oh my God, if someone is this, what would they say?
Some of these things are just jokes, So,
well, some people may take it serious. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm just saying, I'm glad you said it's a joke. Just label it as a joke. You understand what I'm saying? Because some people may take it serious and said, does she really mean reproduction supposed to be this? And all that stuff. So that's why, what I read. I have to ask you that, is this the characteristic of procreation? Is it fair for those who actually want to have
Yeah. If my friends didn't have children, then I couldn't play with their kids. So I want them to have children. I'm just not going to.
Yeah. But because you put that, a lot of people may hold you responsible for what is on your web post. Yeah, what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this. So how can a listener connect with you online or follow you on social media?
Well, you can go to my blog, which is childfreeafrican.com. If you're interested in following me on Twitter, it's at D Yomoah. That's DYOMOAH. You can email me at info@childfreeafrican.com if you'd like to get in touch with me that way.
Yeah. So give advice to those who couldn't reproduce. Let's assume a woman who has tried many years, to reproduce and they are childless and they couldn't reproduce. What advice would you give them?
Assuming that they have given up or if they want to keep trying?
Yeah, assuming they've given up or they haven't given up, but they keep trying. And even though they know it may not happen, but, it's very challenging conversation for them to have, to actually accept that they couldn't have a child.
I would just tell them that not having a child is not all that bad either. And if you want one, there are other ways that you can try to have one. You can foster, maybe you can adopt. But if you make the decision that being a parent is not going to be a part of your life, that doesn't mean you can't have children in your life. You can be the auntie to your friends' children or your siblings' children. And there are different ways that you can still have a maternal role. You can adopt or you can foster children. You can be the auntie to your siblings or your friends' children. But at the same time, if you decide that you're not going to have children, you can still have a fulfilled life. You can still fill your life with all different kinds of projects, activities that you wanted to do. Maybe you could write a book. Maybe you could go traveling. Maybe you could start your own foundation. There are many other ways to have a full life. So if you've decided that you're not going to have children after years of trying and you were not able to, that doesn't mean the end of your life. That just means a different life than maybe what you were planning, but it will still be incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah, thank you for that. So let me ask you another flip side of the question. How would you advise those young African generation who are contemplating to be child-free and they're struggling with what the society may say, what their parents may say, what their community may say, or they may be rejected? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say the first thing is make sure that you take care of your safety. But beyond that, I think all societies change. I mean, it was not that long ago that it was also unacceptable in America and in Europe and in Japan to not have children, and things are changing, but things only change when people take steps to change things. So if you don't want to have a child, maybe you can be the first generation in your family that chose not to have a child, but you can still show that your life is still meaningful, your life is still important.
Thank you so much for that. So thank you, Ms. Doreen Yomoah, for coming to Pansa Pansa Forum. So Pansa Pansa is normalizing a conversation about child-free and childless within our community. As I always say, as we publicly discuss complex issues within our community, we're shredding away stigma associated with uncomfortable dialogue. Thank you so much, Ms. Doreen Yomoah, the founder of Child Free Africa, for joining us to educate our community about Child Free Africa and the purpose of the organization. I really appreciate you coming in, and I hope you come back because I believe we have a lot to talk about. After people hear
Thank you again for having me.
They might be calling me and saying that, no, you need to bring her back. I want to have a big forum on you. Thank you so much for coming to Pansa Pansa Live Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us at the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansapansa.org. That is talk@pansapansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourselves.